first and foremost, let me just let everybody know, I spent an entire year at the South Pole Station on the maintenance crew. And the Ice Cube Neutrino Detector was simply one facility of many that I paid attention to there. And in that process, you know, I obviously learned the science and stuff like that. Like you said, it's a lot of mumbo jumbo that people don't really need to know about, but that's the pretense that it's presented to the world, that the National Science Foundation cut a check for this facility at the South Pole Station and is doing science, wonderfully complex science. But what I have come to find out is that this device, not only is it a passive observational scientific device that is massive and embedded in the ice at the South Pole, it also transmits. I provided documentation for it. Anybody can look it up now. It is referenceable on the internet. I call it the DOM document, and it's on the archives at my website. But what it states is that this device, which has 5,160 DOMs, which is a digital optical module. The idea is that it's observing the neutrino interaction when it hits the nucleus of an ice molecule down there. That's what it's supposed to be built to do. But I found in the paperwork that each of these DOMs also can transmit up to 2,047 volts per DOM. That makes this a giant, powerful, active phased array system, which I am now doing due diligence to let the world know what that means. And the possibilities list is huge. So so November of 2010, I landed on the ice at McMurdo Station and was rapidly deployed further south to 90 degrees at the South Pole Station. I stayed there for the 365 days. That employment, that time period, I guess, was for the summer season. We had about we peaked out at close to 280 personnel at the site in the summer season. The winter season, we went down to 49, and the neutrino detector was something that I was pretty much obligated to go out to every single day. The equipment was so much. This is another thing that I learned that's peculiar, is there's actually so much computer processing equipment. And remember, this is the South Pole Station in the wintertime. My job required me to go out there, and people laugh at me for this and get mad, but I say it. We had chicken wire on a air inlet duct, like a snorkel duct, that the snorkel side went up to and connected to the building, and there was louvers there that were temperature activated louvers. So the processing of these computers made so much heat that in order to cool it down, they're opening the louvers to transfer exterior air in to keep these computers cold. People really, I mean, think about that. I mean, this is a building it's sometimes minus 80 degrees outside. To think that you need that type of cooling capacity, and that was what my job was to make sure this building wasn't overheating in the middle of winter at the South Pole. So first and foremost, the central facility where all the processing happens is sitting atop the ice at South Pole Station, which is 10,300 feet actual elevation. And that is ice above Earth. So the Ice Cube drillers first had to go and drill. They would steam drill down and go basically 2 miles down, close to a 32 to 34 inch diameter hole. And they would drop a string cable down with all of these DOMs on it. Each one of those holes was drilled down, and it was drilled in a giant hexagon that covered kilometers of area in a length and width dimension, and then as far as the depth, going all the way down close to Earth at approximately 2 miles down to that. And everything was cabled and went back to the central building where all the processing computer server towers were and all that stuff. And that was the facility that was being accessed every day and made to be chilled. The intended purpose for the Ice Cube neutrino detector was to detect neutrinos through the muon creation, which was when a neutrino coming from anywhere, in any direction, it could be from the other side of the planet, from off planet, through the planet, it doesn't matter. But when any of those neutrinos smashes into the nucleus of the water molecule, which is in the extremely pure ice. There's nothing else in there. So that's kind of why they're doing it, because they know it's a concentration of something specific, which is just pure water. Great product. When it hits the nucleus, there's two things that occur: a blue flash of light, and the neutrino and the nucleus are destroyed, and a new product called a muon is created. The detector is searching for the blue flash of light. So whatever direction it comes from, it would make like a blast through the array, that when it would hit the nucleus, it would be like a reaction through all of the different DOMs, because they're optical modules and they're receiving at that point. On the receiving end, there's just a bloom that shows up in the array. And from that bloom and the amount of light that hits each DOM, they can triangulate the direction from which the neutrino came from. I was told that they would then take that information, transmit it to all the different telescopes in the world, and then that would allow them to then look, because they're so curious as to what neutrinos are and where they come from. The ability to transmit is a big deal, and I know a lot of people may not necessarily understand what that means. So I want to paint a picture for them. It's one thing to say that, and the government does this all the time. They sidestep stuff. It would be like if somebody walked up to you and they had something you had never, ever seen before in your life, and they were just simply calling it a bullet carrier. It's a bullet carrier. It carries bullets. But if they never told you it's a pistol or a handgun, they're being rather deceptive in what that thing does. And that's the way I now look at the Ice Cube neutrino detector, is that this is a savagely different device from what I was presented. And I'm trying to express to the world what that means, because it is absolutely a very big deal. I'm a firm advocate of Occam's razor, that every possibility is left on the table, and I have to assess each one. And the split second I can negate something as a possibility, I will apply Occam's razor, cut it off, and remove it. But so far, everything that's left on the table is still possible. I have a high suspicion that this is when it was going active and they were dialing things in, and that they caused the Christchurch accident. I believe that they were dialing it in, and there was a high probability that that was just a misfire. I think the reason those people are ignorant about these types of projects is because of compartmentalization of information. And it's amazing, because here I am, somebody who actually wintered at the South Pole Station, and from a crew. I mean, these are limited numbers of people on the planet that do this, and even of that crew, I'm one of the few that was able to see through the compartments. So yes, I've stayed in contact with people, because a lot of this has been getting in touch with folks and saying, hey, you know what? You remember that time that such and such happened, and we had to respond, and this was what we were told, and this was what was going on. What if we look at it this way? I need to talk to you. So a lot of that has happened. I've absolutely been in touch with a lot of the hands from my crew. One of the main reasons that I'm coming forward is because I've maintained that contact, and I do believe these people have been negatively impacted by what I believe are now called directed energy weapons. That, that people have suffered. There are physical things that happen to people that are near this equipment when they're figuring out how it works. And then also, I believe that because we had a potential to go offensively, I believe there's a potential for us to have been attacked. I'm just dealing with the folks and what they're telling me. They're having memory issues. They're having a lot of trouble sleeping. They're having issues with temperature rise out of nowhere. These things are all peculiar to me. I mean, I'm not trying to justify it or anything. I'm just telling you what people are griping, and this is becoming more and more prevalent. It's kind of why I came out of the shadows, because I was noticing this in my life and my crew, but now I'm seeing things like, since last we spoke, we have the Directed Energy Threat Emergency Response Act has come out as a House resolution. The Department of Defense has issued guidelines for their personnel how to report these symptoms internally so they can take care of it appropriately.
Right.
So this stuff's getting very real in just the last couple of weeks. Our station manager was made the news when we were there. This is all referenceable. She was having great issue, I would just say. We'll put it that way. I'm certainly not a doctor, but I'm a winter rover South Pole expert, and from my knowledge and experience of being a winter rover at the South Pole, she seemed to be in the throes of what is medically called winter rover syndrome. They've done studies. There's a certain mechanism of failure to the psyche that occurs typically when you go down the wrong path there, I guess to say. And she seemed to be in that situation. And at the time, she was under the impression, I believe, that she believed she had a stroke. But it turned out that it didn't seem she had a stroke. I believe that she believed it, but I think this was, again, an impact from something that occurred during our winter season there, that she and others, there was an event that negatively impacted everybody. We had a drill. There was a drill out by our radio systems, our radio array, and it was her idea to set up a drill. We had all kinds of response teams, fire teams, medical teams, and the idea was in the harsh climate to test all of our equipment and get out there. Long story short is either A, that equipment wasn't properly isolated by accident or on purpose, or some other thing was going on, and I still don't know. But that event messed up a lot of folks. And the powers that be want to call it a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's just one singular event that I know that it wasn't as presented. People were negatively impacted. Nobody was really talking about it. There was a lot of compartmentalization, and I would say misinformation and disinformation being spread around, because to this day I still don't know exactly what happened there, and I'm still looking into it. There's one more thing that I do want to add about my time there that I did discover. Now, this is something that I don't have documentation for. The other things that I've been discussing so far I can document. But just in the standard of my work at the South Pole Station and my experience, I proved it. The ELF, the extra low frequency system, is also energized. I learned that firsthand when I was there. It's not something that I can document. I didn't know at the time how important it was. But just doing my regular workload, I came across some equipment I had to de-energize. So safety's sake, we have to go over, find the correct circuit breaker panel, lock out the breaker panel, put a lock on it, tag it, make everything official so everything's safe and nobody can hurt themselves. I'm going through the standard motions of doing this, but now in this sub panel that I'm at, I'm checking the circuits, and it's, this is energized, de-energized, energized, and all of a sudden there's a switch that's out. It's on when it's supposed to be off. So now it gives me pause because something's not right. So I'm like, all right, I have to go check with the engineer for, what's going on? How come everything's not matching? At that point, I become informed that the ELF breaker that's on, that I was under the impression it's supposed to be off because it's off. That's what I was told. It's off. I was wrong. I was told it's on, and it stays on, and it's supposed to be on. So go back to what you're doing. And I went back to what I was doing, now with full knowledge that the ELF system is not de-energized. And that's a big deal also. ELF is, again, going back to Nikola Tesla type stuff, and it's very complex. It's a huge antenna array again. Now we're talking, again, miles and miles of antenna embedded in the ice. One of the things that it could be used for, they said was used for way back when, was submarine communications globally, which is a really interesting thing. They're also stating to be using it for science, for the measuring of the magnetosphere, which is very interesting to certain aspects of science that I love, and what's been going on with the temperature of our planet, and many, many interesting things can be understood from observing the magnetosphere. But again, since they're not telling anybody it's on, I don't think it's being simply used for such common things. I think there's a more nefarious aspect to this component. That's where I'm at so far. According to the work of Dr. James Giordano, who gives us the new topic of the battlefield of the mind, ELF and the South Pole Station's Ice Cube Neutrino Detector. These things are right on the list of directed energy weapons and V2K and all kinds of horrible things that I don't want to think about, but I have to impress upon people that there are folks that think of these things, that like to manufacture these devices under the pretense that, well, what if our enemies come up with it first? The V2K is voice to skull, and this is an actual technology that's been around for quite some time, and it was even put to use in the Desert Storm conflict to disarm our enemies. There is a way to put a voice to transmit into somebody else's head in their own voice a message. So this is an interesting thing, actually, because when you look on the list of the Havana syndrome stuff, which they're now actually calling AHI, anomalous health incidents, which is a wonderful, benign term. But the funny thing is they keep being very vague. They're saying that on the list of symptoms is people hearing strange sounds. That's V2K, folks. They're not going to be more specific than that right now. But what that means is they're hearing information coming into their own head in their own voice. And I would suggest this is what our ancestors were impressing upon us, to know thyself. Because way back when, there was a technique that they could do this by. Contemporarily, we're dealing with the technology that can pull it off. I want people to reconsider the way they looked at the world up until this point. Like you're trying to impress upon everybody that, you know, things have been unacknowledged. Things, you know, have been hidden from us. And like myself, I was there with 49 other people that didn't see the things the way that I did at the time. Now we're having conversations and everybody's kind of going, oh. I want everybody to do that with everybody else. Any weird experience that you've had in your past, talk to those people again, communicate it, and share these stories. I mean, it's very important. I oftentimes say that, you know, 80%, 20%, right? 80% of your life is the same as 80% of my life. We wake up, we brush our hair, you have a mortgage to pay and car insurance and all the same things in life. But 20% of your life is going to be very individualized to you and different. Same thing for me. I think the vast majority of us get way too comfortable hiding that 20% because we don't know who to show it to. We don't know where it fits. And the world is very divisive nowadays, and it's pitting us against each other, which is horrible. We need to be more accepting and tolerant of differences so that we can learn together as a society. It's a detriment to us as a whole to not be communicating our oddities amongst our own society. I was walking back from an area they call the dark sector. It was a limited amount of wind that day, which brings up, it rustles up the snow that's laying on the ground. It doesn't really drop from the air there. So there's like a low layer of snow moving across, and I was simply just trying to gauge my distance that I had remaining to get back to the facility. And when I had lifted my eyes up a couple of degrees to get over the drifting snow from what we call grid north, the front end of the elevated station, I saw this massive, massive fireball. Furrowing, there's just flames all around this thing that I could see licking all over the place. And from best I could tell, it appeared to be like what I imagine would have been like a rocky or craggly surface in my mind. But again, huge and moving across the entirety of the sky. At that elevation, there's nothing else in the field of view. So I can't even begin to imagine the distance from horizon to horizon that it was covering. But it just went across the entire sky, blink of an eye, fraction of a second, faster than I can describe. And at the time, because I thought a UFO would have been, you know, a spinning disc with flashing lights and, you know, bug-eyed people, you know, waving out the window at me, I wrote it off. But in reality, it never left my mind that thing never went down. It went straight across the entire horizon. It never went down. It never changed its direction. And it was only after somebody inquired to me afterwards to reconsider that moment that I went, you know something, you're right. That was a controlled flight path. That was an unidentified flying object. It didn't crash.